Hachette Audio presents The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness, written by Tim Macmahon, read by Tim Macmahon and Charles Constant.
To my wife, Maria, kids Bailey, Finley, Luka with an H, and Liam, and Pops McMahon. Chapter 1. Let's make sure this one stays in a Mavericks uniform. Luka Doncic didn't know much about this strange city that would be his new home other than it was hot, and he had heard there were a bunch of cowboys. He was half the globe away from Slovenia, the small European country he was from, and had just stepped foot in Texas for the first time a few hours ago. The teenager whose chin-strap beard couldn't quite connect with his thin mustache had yet to explore Dallas, much less get comfortable. Doncic certainly wasn't in his comfort zone while sitting on a dais in front of a large room in a corner of the American Airlines Center, a space that usually serves as a Tex-Mex restaurant. It was the day after the 2018 NBA draft, when the Dallas Mavericks traded up a couple of spots to land Doncic with the third overall pick, and the team had flown him in along with second-round pick Jalen Brunson for a press conference. Of the 4 languages he spoke fluently, Doncic was least comfortable with English, although he didn't enjoy speaking to the media much in any of them. He didn't have to do it often as a kid sensation with Real Madrid, the powerhouse club that Doncic had just led to EuroLeague and Spanish League titles, and that was how he preferred it. Donnie Nelson, on the other hand, definitely didn't mind having a microphone that afternoon. He was the Mavericks' president of basketball operations, a big personality who was born in Iowa and grew up in Massachusetts, but had taken on a Texan persona, down to the Lucchese boots on his feet, in the 2 decades since he'd followed his father Don to Dallas. The Mavs hadn't had many drafts worth celebrating since the Nelsons landed a goofy German kid named Dirk Nowitzki in 1998, but Nelson was confident that Dallas had just found its next franchise player, and he was happy to take a victory lap. After welcoming the Brunson and Doncic families to the Friendship State using an obscure nickname for Texas, Nelson made a point to thank several members of his scouting staff, particularly those stationed in Europe or who traveled extensively overseas. He left out Dallas's analytics department, whose ranking of Doncic as the best player in the class by a wide margin was key to convincing owner Mark Cuban to trade up for him. But Nelson had never been much of a numbers guy. Then Nelson made a show of praising the players' agents, who were seated in the front row, saying he wanted to publicly extend the family relationship and reminding everyone of how long they'd known each other. Nelson started with Brunson's agent Leon Rose, who had built Creative Artists Agency's basketball division, which included several stars among its long list of NBA clients. As Nelson mentioned, when they first met 25 years before, Rose's only client was Brunson's father, Rick, a journeyman who played for 8 teams during his 9-year career. Nelson gushed about Rose building his career the good old-fashioned way through toughness and perseverance, and jokingly thanked him for blocking teams from drafting Jalen Brunson, starting with the 20th overall pick until the Mavs went on the clock at number 33. Nelson chuckled, reaching to his left and patting the leg of Brunson, who wore a black suit with a white shirt and black tie, looking like an MBA graduate reporting for his first day of work on Wall Street. Nelson's punchline generated a toothless grin from the undersized point guard who'd won 2 national titles and was the NCAA Player of the Year for Villanova. Nelson then moved on to Doncic's lead agent, Bill Duffy, a familiar name to Mavericks fans primarily because he represented Steve Nash, who Nelson made sure to mention. You had another international player. A young Canadian, Nelson said as Doncic unscrewed the lid on a water bottle and took a swig. Nelson reminisced about the night 20 years before, when the Mavs not only got Nowitzki in the draft, but also scored Nash in a trade with the Phoenix Suns, a brilliant move Nelson had lobbied his coach/general manager/dad to make. This was pretty awkward. Nash will always be remembered in Dallas as the legend who the Mavs let leave. When Nash returned to Phoenix in free agency in 2004, the Mavs' decision not to match the Suns' offer for the 30-year-old star, who happened to be Nowitzki's best friend, was so controversial that Cuban published a 4,411-word post on his site, blogmaverick.com. He felt the need to explain all the logical, illogical, emotional, and financial scenarios in a process that led to such a painful result for the franchise and its fans. Cuban's strained relationship with Duffy fell in the emotional category. "I'm not a big fan of his, and he knows it," Cuban wrote then. Nash, of course, made the Mavs look like fools, winning MVP the next 2 seasons and instantly turning the Suns into a contender while running an offense that revolutionized the league. Bickering between Don Nelson and Cuban about who was to blame for losing Nash was a factor in the bitter divorce between the owner and coach/GM, who stepped down the next season and ended up suing to collect deferred salary. Somehow, Donnie Nelson not only survived the split, but was also promoted to become the Mavs' top basketball executive. Cuban, years after the fact, admitted that letting Nash go was the biggest basketball mistake he ever made. But that bizarre bit of Mavericks history didn't matter to Doncic, who was a toddler at the time. Duffy has a sort of thick skin required to thrive in such a cutthroat business, so as far as he was concerned, bygones from a generation ago were bygones. However, just in case anyone somehow forgot about the Mavs botching Nash's free agency during his prime, Nelson used it as fodder for another joke. "Welcome back, and let's just make sure this one stays in a Mavericks uniform," Nelson said, reaching over Brunson to squeeze Doncic's right leg. "What do you say, Bill?" Some courtesy laughter broke out. Doncic, wearing a blue polo shirt buttoned to the top underneath an unzipped khaki jacket, cracked a smile. Mavs coach Rick Carlisle, sitting to Doncic's left and not exactly known for his sense of humor, remained stone-faced. Nelson had spoken an uncomfortable lump of truth in jest. There is pressure that comes along with drafting an NBA prodigy, a billing the Mavs believed Doncic fit even though 3 teams had passed on the chance to select him. With superstars, it boils down to this: keep them happy, which typically requires building a contender around them at the minimum, or they might eventually leave. The clock starts ticking as soon as a prize lottery pick is selected. Franchises go to great lengths to position themselves to poach superstars from other teams. Case in point, the Mavs traded for the 60th and final pick in this 2018 draft to select Kostas Antetokounmpo. "A nice developmental player for us in the G League," Nelson said with a straight face. He was a skinny 6'10" forward who had averaged 5.2 points and 2.9 rebounds per game during his lone season at Dayton, a mid-major program that finished a few games under 500 that year, and just so happened to be the younger brother of Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis had developed into a dominant force in the 5 years since the 2013 draft, when Nelson unsuccessfully lobbied Cuban to select the mysterious teenage prospect out of Greece's second division league. He had just finished the first season of a 4-year, $100 million extension of his rookie contract, but his potential to become an unrestricted free agent in the summer of 2021 had already become a focal point for front offices around the league. For the Mavericks, the opportunity to establish ties with the Antetokounmpo family justified taking a second-round flyer on a marginal prospect. He spent a season on a 2-way deal with the Mavs, and when he was released, the Los Angeles Lakers pounced on the opportunity to claim Giannis's little brother off waivers. All of the posturing proved irrelevant when Giannis signed a maximum extension in 2020, a year before he would have become an unrestricted free agent. A deal he agreed to immediately after Milwaukee made a trade for Drew Holiday that eliminated Giannis's doubts that the Bucks could win a title. That provides a glimpse of the sort of posturing that happens in the NBA to give even the slightest percentage boost to the odds of landing a franchise-changing player. The roots of this phenomenon date back more than 5 decades to when Oscar Robertson, a Hall of Fame guard who is president of the NBA Players Association, filed a class-action antitrust lawsuit against the league in April 1970, fighting for free agency. At the time, the NBA had a reserve clause, bounding a player to one team for the duration of his career at the team's option. Robertson versus National Basketball Association dragged on in the court system for 6 years before being settled in 1976, 2 years after Robertson had retired, granting players free agency after their contracts expired, although teams were allowed the right to match offers to keep players.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?